All right. Morning. Good evening, everybody. It's been a long week, hasn't it? Welcome to tonight's presentation. I'm very excited to have my friend Leah Crenshaw here to present on some of her dissertation research. Leah is a native Arkansan from Texarkana, where she went to then undergrad at Hendrix College, where we met, working with Dr. Maureen McClung, who's in the audience tonight. Shout out. After that, getting her bachelor's, she worked various bird jobs and then moved on to work on her master's from the University of Northern Colorado, where she studied Western Meadowlarks and is now working on studying the effects of shade growing coffee and community composition and other factors of mixed species flocks in birds in Panama. So, Leah, take it away. We're excited to hear about your research tonight.
Great, thank you so much. Gosh, the very beginning of my presentation is going to be a little bit silly because, well, you'll see. Um, so yeah, as Kevin introduced me, my name is Leah, and I'm going to be talking with you all tonight about my research where I investigate how we can use coffee to help us conserve birds. And I hope to understand with my dissertation the effects of landscape context when it comes to the effects of shade growing coffee. And I do this research at Cornell University, advised by Dr. Amanda Rodewald. Um, so as Kevin pointed out, I am indeed from Texarkana, Arkansas, and I'm sure a lot of you have been through there, but this is about what it looks like on the off chance you haven't visited. And then from there, I went to do my undergrad at Hendrix College, where where I discovered for the first time that biology was a career choice. And I worked on various field jobs with Maureen McClung, who, as previously stated, is in the audience and who was also the conduit of me and Kevin becoming friends. And this is her in the lower right-hand corner. And then I moved to Greeley, Colorado to work on my master's degree at the University of Northern Colorado. I studied Western Meadowlarks and how the grassland habitat that surrounds them impacts their song structure. And I did that work with Dr. Lauren Benedict. And finally, now I have moved all the way up to Ithaca, New York, where it gets dark every day these days at 4:45 p.m. It is very cold. And here I am at Cornell University working on my PhD. And then in my free time, I volunteer at the Braddock Bay Bird Observatory. So today I'm going to be talking about coffee. I've already mentioned it, I guess, a few times. And coffee is a global commodity. As you can see by this map of coffee production across the globe, you might notice, especially if you are fond of doing traveling birding trips, that coffee is grown in some of the most biodiverse regions of the planet. And it is a massive global production. Over 10 billion kilograms of coffee are produced annually. And that happens across 12.5 million farms and supports 125 million jobs. Notably, with coffee, in a way that differs from other agricultural products, coffee is predominantly produced on family farms that are less than 5 hectares in area. So that's less than the size of 10 football fields. These are small scale farms compared to the sorts of things that we see across the United States. And the size of these farms and the fact that these production numbers are so low then makes coffee farmers really vulnerable to an incredibly volatile market. And so I went through the news over the last year to see what kinds of changes I might be able to show you all about coffee. And I found what I think is a really compelling story, maybe, I hope. And it's that in July, we were seeing economic uncertainties face the globe for various political reasons, often driven by the way that the United States is choosing to interact commercially with the planet. And that came with falling coffee prices. However, just 2 months after that article was published, we saw that coffee prices were surging instead, and they were reaching record highs for the 2020s. And that also came with multiple companies across the country filing for bankruptcy as those coffee prices remained very, very high. And then just a couple of days ago, yesterday, we saw coffee prices plunging on the prospects of lower tariffs. But wait, no, just kidding. That actually was not true. It turned out the very next day, 12 hours later, we saw a complete turnaround of these coffee prices. And I bring this up to point out the fact that although coffee is a very consistently consumed product on our end, the experiences that producers are having as far as the consistency of coffee as a livelihood are incredibly different. And these prices are then directly impacting livelihoods as they change. In addition to the fluctuating prices, the coffee market is also subject to various crop diseases and pests. So one of these is a type of fungal infection that coffee can get called La Roya or coffee leaf rust. It's shown on the left in this image. It produces holes in the coffee leaves, and a severe outbreak on a farm can devastate an entire crop and cause a farmer to have to cut back all of their coffee. Another very persistent coffee pest that is the bane of many a farmer is La Broca, or as it's called in English, the coffee berry borer beetle. And so as you can see in this photo on the right, it's an incredibly tiny beetle that burrows into the coffee into the green coffee berries well before harvest, lays its eggs, and it destroys the coffee bean, and it produces enormous loss of product for producers. Finally, we're increasingly seeing the effects of climate change on coffee. And so as we face increasingly unpredictable climate scenarios and unseasonable droughts and unseasonable rains, we see this have devastating effects on coffee producers. So for example, on the left, I'm showing imagery from the 2024 Brazilian wildfires that were both caused and exacerbated by a severe drought that struck the region. And then on the right, I'm showing some of the aftermath of a series of unseasonable severe flooding events that struck in India in 2018. And these caused massive crop losses across India's coffee producing regions, as well as many landslides that, in addition to destroying that year's crop, pretty severely and permanently affected farmers' ability to grow crops in the future. And so as we consider the ways that coffee is grown, I think it's helpful to have a bit of historical context to understand where we came from, to better understand how we get where we go and where we are now as a state of coffee growing. Historically, when coffee was domesticated, it was an understory forest plant in Ethiopia. And so it was first cultivated in these diverse forest environments, and from there it spread worldwide. This style of coffee production is still in place today, where coffee can be grown under diverse forest conditions with quite a lot of native trees, both in the mid-story and overstory. And that is called rustic or traditional coffee growing. There have been additional intensifications wherein coffee is instead grown under a partially thinned canopy environment. So folks come in and reduce the amount of competition that the coffee plants have to deal with, and they do that by taking out a bunch of trees. But this still maintains some shade and some canopy connectivity in the coffee farming plot. Finally, the most intensive approach to growing coffee is called full sun monoculture, in which all other woody vegetation that would be in a habitat is removed to produce an entirely coffee monoculture crop. This is more similar to the way that we grow crops in the United States. So if you imagine driving past any field with soy, corn, whatever, it looks about like that, but with coffee. This was made possible in part by the development of sun-tolerant cultivars of coffee in the 1970s, and it was also sped along by the desire of farmers to be able to have highly productive crops on lower and lower land footprints. This does also come with the requirement that agrochemical use is increased, and with these higher planting densities, we see the intensity of disease and pest outbreaks increasing. As you might expect, this conversion from a traditional agroforest system all the way to full sun agroforestry is pretty bad for basically all biodiversity that would live on a coffee farm. And so shown here are three of the species that are known to disappear from a habitat when a traditional shade-grown coffee plot in Costa Rica gets converted into full-sun monoculture. These are the Chiriquí quail dove on the left, the fiery-billed aracari in the center, and the very aptly named charming hummingbird on the right. And these are three of some of the hundreds of species that are known to disappear from landscapes when landscapes get converted to full sun monoculture. However, there have been increasing concerns over the sustainability of full sun monoculture coffee farms, both in regards to the sustainability from a biodiversity perspective and the resilience of these farms in the face of increasingly severe climate disasters and the loss of nutrients from soils. And so we're seeing, while we still see across coffee growing habitats, especially in Central and South America, that the footprint of sun-grown monoculture is expanding, we also see that farmers are increasingly wanting to return to a shade-growing coffee approach. And so this is a photo I took from one of my field sites down in Panama that shows you what it looks like to be on the ground in a traditional shade-grown coffee farm. And so because this coffee is grown under canopy trees, as you can see here, it produces a slower production of the coffee bean, which then creates a more flavorful coffee because there's less sunlight coming down and hitting the coffee plants. They grow more slowly. It also does several other benefits that I'll get to in just a second. And critically, as I'm sure you can imagine, enormously supports biodiversity. So shade-grown coffee serves as a sustainable crop exemplar where farmers can reduce their chemical input and offer better worker conditions. As I'm sure you know, it's much more pleasant to work in the shade than in the sun, for example. And it's also a lot safer for farmers to be reducing their use, their handling of agrochemicals. Additionally, because shade-grown coffee farms can preserve the biodiversity that lives on farms, we see increased ecosystem services provided by the ecosystem of a shade-grown coffee farm compared to sun-grown coffee. So that includes things like pollinators, which I've shown on the upper right, and pest control services, which I've shown on the lower right, such as various warblers that will then go through and eat crop pests, including that coffee bearer borer beetle that I mentioned. Finally, for the farmers themselves, they are able to reach increased financial stability as a result of taking a shade-grown coffee approach because they're able to access possibly diversified income streams. For example, a lot of farmers will choose to plant orange trees over their farms as a type of shade that they use, and then they're able to sell the oranges. And also, because farmers are making these sustainable choices, they're able to access price premiums through incentive programs. And I'll get into a little bit more about those as well. Finally, with shade-grown coffee, we see an increased abundance and diversity of wildlife across all taxa. Here are some of the examples that have been studied in the literature. But why would we care about this all the way from Arkansas? All of this is well and good, and I'm sure I don't need to spend a lot of time convincing an Audubon Society on the intrinsic value of biodiversity. But I do want to point out one thing that I think makes studying birds so special and that I think makes our love for birds so special. And it's that migration connects birds to habitats across the world, and it connects us as bird watchers and us as conservationists to people that we will never meet, but will still be sitting there looking at the exact same birds. And I think that's really beautifully illustrated by indigo buntings, which within the span of a month will go all the way from Panama up into Arkansas, and then we see them and we hear them all summer. So this map on the right is called a shared stewardship map. It uses the abundance of data that eBird has access to map the connections between locations in the United States and other parts around the world where there are shared species and shared stewardship opportunities. So here we can see a distribution of the birds that breed in Arkansas and then spend their non-breeding season elsewhere. In this case, it's mapping 43 species. Additionally, on the left now, you can see a map of suitable coffee growing habitats. And you'll notice that there's quite a lot of overlap where the same regions that are housing our birds that we love and adore in Arkansas are the same regions that are growing some of the greatest quantities of coffee in the world. And I bring this up because while there is so much important work happening across the United States right now and in Arkansas to conserve our birds, it's also really important to pay attention to where our birds are spending 50, 60, 70% of their year. Because if with all of our resources and scientific opportunities and financial opportunities in the United States, if we don't also use those resources to support conservation across Central and South America, we won't get the job done to preserve the species that we care about. I just think that's really beautifully illustrated by the way that all of our birds are traveling across Central and South America. And so how do we do that? Once we decide that shade-growing coffee is something that we care about, that conserving birds on coffee farms is something that we care about, how do we go about making sure it happens? There are three main ways that shade-growing coffee is financially incentivized. One of those is through certification programs where an organization will make a point of creating a testing system for coffee farms to verify that they go through sustainable practices. These are things like the USDA organic certification, the Fair Trade Alliance, the Rainforest Alliance, or the bird-friendly Smithsonian eco-label. Another strategy is standards that are set by large companies that buy quite a lot of coffee supply, where they have minimum requirements for the coffee farms that they purchase from. And finally, direct trade relationships where small-scale roasters will work directly with coffee farmers and establish between the two parties their own expectations of sustainable practices. But it's worth noting that all of these systems rely on understanding what attributes make a coffee farm good or bad for birds. And so the Smithsonian Bird Friendly certification is the only one of these certifications for coffee that's specific to birds, and it's known to be the strictest in terms of factors that affect biodiversity. These are the standards that were derived over the course of quite a lot of research on the subject in the last 20 years. But I actually want to key us into one thing that we critically do not know, which is what does it mean for a farm to be certified bird friendly when it is within a context that is highly fragmented, such as this farm that I've shown on the right, versus for a farm to be bird friendly certified and go through all of these sustainability practices when it is within a predominantly forested matrix. In other words, when we're looking at these coffee farms, do these sustainable attributes affect birds the same way? Or is it better to focus on some farms than other farms? This is the exact research that my dissertation seeks to investigate. My broad question is, I ask, how do local and landscape scale agroforestry practices influence the value of coffee farms for birds? And I'm doing this research in conjunction with the Smithsonian Tropical Research Institute and the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center, which runs the bird-friendly certification. I do my research in Panama, and I'm now in the third year of my PhD. I'm preparing for my third trip to Panama. But back in 2024, I was working in the Renacimiento district in Chiriquí province, and I worked across 24 farm sites and 29 forest sites. And then last year, I worked across 12 farm sites and 11 forest sites in Gualaca District. And in order to understand how the avian communities are structured across these habitats, I used pretty typical bird surveys that are 100-meter transects that I would repeat visit 2 to 3 times at each site, where I would count every bird that I saw or heard. We all like to bird watch, so it is as it seems like it is. It's exactly what you think. And then additionally, I would be looking for mixed species foraging flocks across the landscape. And so mixed species foraging flocks are something that we see pretty often in Arkansas, especially in the winter, where you will get groups of chickadees, titmice, sparrows, all moving through habitat together and all benefiting from being in a crowd without facing too much competition. And this phenomenon is actually incredibly common and even more important to the ecology of bird communities in the tropics, where there will be large-scale groups of birds that are moving through, and for some species, exclusively operating and foraging within mixed species foraging flocks. So anytime we encountered a mixed species flock on a transect, we would pause the transect and devote a minimum of 15 minutes or until the birds escaped, which happened all the time. We would devote that time to determining the size and composition of the flock. And then we also collected mixed species foraging flocks opportunistically. Anytime we were moving through the landscape, doing any kind of work, if we heard those chipping contact calls, we stopped what we were doing and we followed the flock. In order to understand the local habitat, and so this is the farm level characteristics that are influencing birds, we measured several of the vegetation characteristics that are specifically controlled in certification requirements, or we looked at metrics of vegetation that are just very commonly known to influence birds. And so these are some of these here. I would be more than delighted to expound upon how each one is measured, but I figured it might not be the most interesting use of our time, but feel free to ask me. Finally, to understand the landscape context around each farm, I used the percent forest cover around the farm at a 2-kilometer circular buffer. And so I was able to use a land cover model that was designed by the Smithsonian for this region. And it basically produces these spatial maps of exactly what is forest and what is shade coffee. And from there, I could calculate the percent of each habitat that was, the percent of each buffer that was forest cover. So that was a lot of methods, but now I'm happy to get into some of the results. We're going to spend just a minute here getting oriented. These are from my 2024 field season. And so we categorized all of our sites as either occurring in forest habitat, which I show in blue, in a shade-grown coffee habitat, which I show in teal, or in a sun-grown monoculture habitat, which I show in yellow. So 2 of these, the shade and the sun, have coffee, and then those forest sites have no coffee. They function as a control. We also divided our sites between those that had more than 40% forest cover in the surrounding area, which I show in the darker blue, teal, and yellow, or those that had less forest cover, the sites that were more fragmented, which I show in the lighter blue, teal, and yellow. So if we'll direct our attention first to the forest plots that were in highly forested landscapes, this serves for our interpretation as a type of control, because this is a habitat that is good quality primary forest in a very forested region. It's wonderful bird watching. And in these sites, we saw pretty high richnesses of our resident species that we would expect to find in these high quality forest habitats. These were species like bellbirds, chlorospingus, late-throated redstarts, tropical parulas, which is what I actually showed. Embarrassing. Anyway, when we then moved into forest sites that were within a more fragmented landscape, so when we were getting towards the edges of our forests, we saw that some of our most sensitive species, such as the bellbirds, would drop out of those habitats. Interestingly, we saw a mirror pattern in our sites where we were growing, where sun coffee monoculture was being grown, where we would see our highest richnesses on sun-grown coffee sites when they were within a highly fragmented open landscape. The driving force behind this was that these sites were picking up in a landscape that was filled with open spaces, a lot of open habitat specialist species. These were things like lesser goldfinches, blue-headed parrots, and yellow-faced grassquits. And then when we had a site that was sun-grown monoculture, incredibly intense coffee farming, in a landscape that was predominantly forested, we would see that almost all of the birds would leave these spaces, and we would only get maybe 3, 4, or 5 species. Finally, when we consider all of the species that could be found, we saw our highest across the entire study area. We saw our highest species richnesses in our high forested shade-grown coffee sites. But we'll talk about the shade-grown coffee sites in a low forested habitat first, because I animated them in the wrong order. Anyway, and so we would have all of these species and pick up a mix of both our open habitat specialists and our forest specialists when we were in these intermediary spaces offered by shade-grown coffee. And that resulted in us having these highest richnesses when we were in areas with a lot of forest cover surrounding the area. What would happen, and what we observed happening in the field, was that when there are these trees surrounding the area and the trees continue across the farm, so too do the forest birds continue across the farm. They're happy to move through that environment because these tree canopies aren't broken. We were also investigating flocking behavior. And so I'm going to briefly talk to you about the slate-throated redstart. Some of the factors that influence whether a bird decides to join a flock are things like how dispersed and how patchy are resources, things like food. If you can access food very consistently in an even distribution across the landscape, then it's not very advantageous for a bird to be in a group because it doesn't have trouble finding food on its own. However, when food resources are patchily distributed, a bird benefits a lot from being in a group because then there's many eyes searching for food. Additionally, birds will benefit from group living by having many eyes searching for predators. And so this is something that can often be another reduction on the competition effects that birds face by living with a lot of neighbors. By being a member of a crowd, they are both less likely to be the bird that does get selected to be eaten, but they also have more birds hanging out together, participating in watching for predators and defending against predators. And so this was really beautifully illustrated by the slate-throated redstart, which we found was more likely to be participating in a flock when they were in a highly fragmented habitat compared to when they were in a highly forested, minimally fragmented habitat. So what this figure is showing is the flocking propensity. If we found a slate-throated redstart, what percent of them were in a flock across the habitat types? So these blue lollipops on the left show that these birds were often participating in mixed species flocks, especially when we found them in forest, but that when we found them in forests that were in highly fragmented areas, they were more likely to be participating in a flock. And we saw this same relationship in shade-grown coffee habitats, where it was even more stark with the reduction in surrounding forest cover, the increasing fragmentation, and with the reduction in mid-story vegetation, these birds were very consistently participating in mixed species foraging flocks. This finding suggests that these birds are cueing into either increased predator risk or increased resource patchiness, wherein it's much more beneficial for them to be in this group compared to going at it alone. But this trend wasn't necessarily consistent across even other members of the warbler group. So for example, the golden-crowned warbler, which is another resident species of warbler, this species is very sensitive to open habitats. And so when these birds were found in forest, they were very likely to be a part of a mixed species foraging flock. But when these birds were found in shade-grown coffee, these birds were much less likely to be participating in a flock. And if it was shade-grown coffee in a highly fragmented environment, or if it was sun-grown coffee at all, these birds were simply not present. So this suggests that for one species, it is the landscape context that is more important to driving their foraging decisions, whereas for another species, the thing that is most important is overall habitat fit. And when these birds were caught out in shade-grown coffee farms, they were possibly in a pretty subpar habitat for them and trying to move through it and move on. that was a lot of data, so I want to briefly talk about the key takeaways of this. For birds, the biodiversity benefits of shade coffee are landscape dependent. Across all of these birds, we saw that the responses of species to these sustainable practices depended pretty heavily on what the landscape surrounding the farm was doing. And so that brings me to some of the research that I'm now doing as I move forward. I have one more field season coming up this January, and I'm going to continue researching how bird communities as a whole respond to the landscape context, as well as investigating how mixed species flocks respond to these coffee growing landscapes. But then also projects 3 and 4 are two things that I'm hoping to expand upon this upcoming year. For example, one of the things I'm hoping to do is produce a shade tree catalog for landowners so that we can identify in Panama what shade trees are most beneficial, so that then farmers can identify what trees they want to be planting on their farms to support both birds and their own interests. And then finally, I want to investigate using the relationships that I've found so far in my research and using the relationships that I hope to find in this upcoming year. I'm planning to scale up these relationships using eBird to understand how, as we face climate change and as we see changes to coffee growing suitable habitat through time, what will that do to our bird populations in this region? I also want to briefly highlight some of the other outcomes of this project beyond the specific hard science of it. By working directly with the Smithsonian, we are able to inform the bird-friendly standards and practices. And so one of the exciting changes that we've seen, not just as a result of this research, rather as part of an ongoing accumulation of information that we've contributed to, is that the Smithsonian has added in not just a focus on having strictly shade-grown coffee, but instead also incentivizing farmers to preserve patches of forest on their own farms that then can also warrant a sustainable certification, which is really exciting because it promotes the protection of more overall forest cover, which we now know is incredibly important to farm sustainability. I was also really lucky to be able to leverage the project and leverage the support that I received from various donors to hire both an undergraduate and early professional intern who I was able to train in field methods, particularly around bird banding, and to support for presenting their research at the Smithsonian Bird Friendly Research Symposium, which was really excitingly attended by over 500 people and was the first presentation opportunity these two scientists had. And finally, working directly with producers, we were able to provide to various farmers specific and tailored bird guides to their own farms so that they would have it for the farmers who participate in agritourism. They would have another way to connect with tourists over the biodiversity that they're preserving. And this was something that we put together using both common names that we assembled via working with local community partners and using the English common names so that there's now this opportunity for farmers to have a shared dialogue over about the birds on their farms with visitors that they might see. And I realized that was a lot of coffee and a lot of research talk, but I hope you all have enjoyed it. I want to briefly acknowledge that this has been a pretty big project. I've now been working on it for 2.5 years, and I've received quite a lot of financial support from both within Cornell University and the Cornell Lab of Ornithology and outside of it. I've also been able to work with a wide variety of folks who I've shown here. And finally, if you've enjoyed this talk, if you're interested in learning more, I have a website where I talk about more of the research outcomes that I've had, and I would be happy to answer any questions you all have.
Awesome. Thanks, Leah. This is so cool just to see it all. And I'll have to invite you back when you get it all done so we can hear more outcomes from your exciting research. But yeah, I'll turn it over to folks. Feel free to unmute or put in the chat any questions you guys have for Leah.
So, Leah, this is Cindy Franklin. Is there any coffee rustling down there where people are stealing the coffee beans from one another?
Not that I've seen. That would be,
I'm just curious.
yeah, I don't know if that's something that's common in other regions. It's definitely not something that I've seen. Part of it is that harvesting coffee is pretty exclusively done still by hand, and a lot of these farms are pretty small, so it is pretty specifically the farmer and maybe the landowner and maybe one or two other employees who are immediate family members going through harvesting plants. A lot of these farmers are also members of a cooperative unit for there's one for Renacimiento, there's one for Gualaca. And so I think that there would be, this is me speculating now, but I think that there would be a lot of pressure
Uh,
socially and in terms of like your own personal business interests to keep a good teamwork attitude about everything,
hmm,
with all of your friends and neighbors. They're pretty tight-knit communities too.
sure.
One thing though that is pretty contentious is that there's a variety of coffee called Cafe Geisha that can actually only be grown in this region of Panama. And it's pretty consistently one of the most expensive types of coffee in the world, and very, very consistently is ranked. It is a Cafe Geisha that is ranked as the best coffee of all of the coffees in the world annually by the professional coffee tasters, who key into special stuff that when I taste the coffee, I don't notice. But the genetic stocks of these plants were, and having any of these plants is actually still pretty rare, even in this region. And so coffee bean rustling, not as much of an issue, but there's definitely always pretty consistently landowners that know exactly how many geisha producing plants every other one of their neighbors has on their farms.
Hmm.
Oh, Susie, I'm so sorry about the website issue. It doesn't look like it has a typo. Have I typed it backwards? I'll be so embarrassed if I've typed it backwards and it's conservation and coffee. Here we go. This should work if I direct you straight to one of the pages.
So, well, if nobody else is going to talk, I'm going to ask another question. Have you seen a decline in the number of birds that you're seeing over time in Panama?
So for me specifically, I'm pretty new to the region on the scale of large scale bird declines, having only been down 2 years in a row and mainly working in different areas. But one of the really cool things about working with the Smithsonian is that some of the field station managers there, including Carlos Espinosa, who I talk about on the previous slide, um, Carlos Espinosa has been working at the Fortuna Field Station, where I worked in 2025 for a couple of decades now. And one of the things that he's often mentioned to me is that we see, especially with some of the most sensitive forest species, that these birds are moving farther and farther upslope and becoming
Hmm.
rarer and rarer in the landscape. And this is also something that the farmers talk about quite a lot, where birds that they would expect to be seeing coming down out of the mountains and into the coffee farms are doing that less frequently. And this is something that the farmers, and Carlos particularly, are attributing to things like changes in the consistency of fruit output from the different trees species on farms and things like that, as well as human encroachment into forest habitat. I
Hmm.
think that Barry has a question.
Actually, I do. I'm Susan
Oh,
Hardin.
hello.
And I have a question on the Panamanian, whatever you said, coffee. I have
Mm-hmm.
never seen coffee from Panama for sale in even coffee stores. So, you talked about how exquisite it is, so maybe that's part of it. But how does one get some Panama coffee?
Oh, yeah, I'm so glad that you asked. So, Yeah, it's pretty uncommon to see it at to see Panamanian coffee at grocery stores in the United States. Part of that is because Panama is a pretty small country, and so some of the really big producers are things like Brazil and Colombia, where they're just putting out a lot of coffee, so it's just diluting Panama's place in the market. But if you one of the things that you're able to do to get plugged into immediately bird-friendly coffee is on the Smithsonian website, they publish a list of bird-friendly coffee producers, where to purchase. So I'll put that link in the chat right now. And then regarding Panamanian geisha, that's something that is typically only accessible through specialty websites in the United States. And if you just search up Panamanian geisha, spelled the same way as like geisha, Geisha, that's the best way to find it, I would say.
What? Have the people who asked about Panama coffee contact Rosark Coffee in Rosebud, Arkansas.
Oh, cool.
Yeah.
I'll contact Rosark Coffee in Rosebud, Arkansas. Yum. Oh.
They bring in coffee from all over the world,
Oh, neat.
and they may well have Panamanian. Pretty sure they do.
That's awesome. That's really exciting. Every time I come home from Panama, I am always a little bit worried about getting stopped at customs, either in Panama or in the United States, because I have my big backpack that I use to carry around all of my gear, but it's just full of coffee. I worry a little bit that I look like I'm smuggling.
They probably won't have. They probably won't have the high-end Panamanian that you're talking about, but you never know.
You never know for sure. And certainly if you feel really passionate and excited to try it, I can put you in contact with some roasters in Panama who could probably arrange a very, very expensive shipment.
That's $100 a pound or whatever.
It's probably something crazy. I save a lot of money carrying it on my back.
Leah, I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And enjoyed your talk very much. So did my kids.
Help me, please.
You mentioned you're gonna identify trees that the farmers could maybe plant, right? That would provide shade and cover and fruit and other things. Do you have like a strategy for that? Like, is that sort of a vibe kind of thing? Sorry, I'm staring at my TV and not my camera. Is that like, I'm thinking about when I was there with you and we were kind of walking around, like, what is your tactic for that? For kind of picking out which ones, is it going to be based on sort of what's already present in the region, or are you going to try to be introducing ones that you notice on one farmer's farm are really working and you want to introduce those to another person's farm? What's sort of the strategy for establishing that?
Yeah, I'm so glad that you asked. I actually have a super specific one written up. I'm writing grants on this right now. And so this is a protocol that the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center has already executed in other coffee growing regions around the world. And so there is, for example, a shade tree catalog that serves this same purpose for coffee growing habitats in Peru. And they have a protocol established. Although the reason why this research is still really important, because I realized then, well, if we have this already, why do we need it? The reason why this research is still really important is by doing this work in various countries, in Peru, in Colombia, which aren't even super geographically separated, although it is pretty far from a geological perspective. They found that even within genuses, the trees that are important vary a lot, and they'll see almost complete community turnover between countries and regions in the tree species. So they have this protocol that needs to happen where trees are identified through a combination of interviewing landowners to see what trees are most highly valued by the landowners, and then inventorying the farms in a region to see what trees are most present on the landscape as both shade coffee trees and in things like the windbreaks and the edge patches surrounding the coffee farms, and then using and drawing from that list of possible focal species, then using some informed decision making around things like which trees are nitrogen fixers, which trees produce steady fruit mass that are heavily consumed by birds. We identify a list of 30 focal tree species that will then be the 30 species that we're comparing for the catalog. Once we have 30 tree species identified, and that's something that we're planning to do, hopefully with Body, who you know, if we can convince him to work for us. Otherwise, we'll find someone else. But fingers crossed. We're going to go through and identify those trees this January and February, and then identify 10 replicates of each tree species within the minimum possible area that we can manage on farms to do bird observations, observing the way that birds are interacting with those trees in 6 10-minute periods per 3 months of a year to capture some of the seasonal variation as well. And so with these bird observations, it's recording things like every single species to land in the tree, the count of those species to land in the tree, the amount of time that they're spending in that tree, and whether they seem to be displaying like foraging behaviors in that tree, or maybe something else like scanning for predators, having a sit down, 10 minutes of preening. And then we analyzed from there, from this suite of 30 trees that are available, what is happening as far as bird use, how are birds using these trees, and how much relative to the other 29 species. And then we also use existing data that we have on the life history and the ecology of these trees, and going back to these landowner interviews to see what other possible co-benefits are they serving to farmers. And so if you look up, I'm realizing that I'm sharing my screen every time I look something up on the internet, which I'm glad I stay focused and all, but anyway, I can pull up for you a version of this that exists for Peru, so that you can kind of see what gets produced. Share screen two. Right here, well, we pulled up here we have the Peruvian catalog. So this is one of the regions that also produces quite a lot of coffee, and we have it organized by species. And you can see this is a species that is native to Peru. It is known to be beneficial to the coffee. It is got various benefits as well, and then it checks whether there are biodiversity benefits for the tree species. Does that seem to have gotten at your question, Maureen?
Interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. And yeah, I couldn't tell if it was like something that you were sort of generating in the moment, like while you're down there, or whether there was an established protocol. And this definitely sounds like it's a lot. Yeah, there's an established protocol, and that you have your work cut out for you this season on top of everything else you're already doing down there. So, but I
Yeah,
love it that you're continuing all the behavioral observations. I'm excited that you get to do more of that down there.
I am too. It's really nice to be able to, because like, as you know, we've talked about this a whole bunch, but the rest of the audience doesn't know. This is a project that I came on to and designed myself with the Smithsonian and with my advisor. And so being able to plug into existing needs that the farmers have and existing protocols that really sometimes there is research where the thing that needs to happen most is the farmers know what they want and we know how to get it. We just need somebody to go get it. And so I feel really happy that this is something where the farmers have been asking me over the last 2 years, are you going to find out what tree species are best? Because it's the most straightforward thing to do, and it's something that the farmers really care about. And so I'm really happy that I'm able to collaborate in a way that I can provide that.
All very cool work, Leah. I'm gonna ask a different kind of question. What is your favorite like moment or story or bird or observation? I'm sure there's tons of cool ones, but what's your favorite so far in your work?
Okay, well, one part that I really, really loved was that we have this bird in this region called Lesson's motmots. You can see it right here. It's blue and beautiful and green and black. It's got red eyes. It's got these, oh gosh, there's that special name for when it's got a teeny tiny little flag on the end of its tail. Someone in the crowd definitely knows it, but I can't remember it right now. It's this beautiful species that I love a lot that is pretty fond of coffee habitat. It likes this semi-open secondary forest. And we caught one day while we were doing mist netting, which I didn't present on here, the body condition work, because it is, well, anyway, it's a whole separate story. Not as like uplifting. Well, it's a happy story. Nothing bad happened. We just didn't catch enough birds to analyze the data. Long and short of it. It's just not that interesting. But we put in a lot of work, and bird banding in a mobile bird banding station with a team of 3 was incredibly hard. I was texting you and Maureen all the time about my troubles, so you know it was hard. And at one point, Josue called me on the radio and said in the most dead tone imaginable, "You're not gonna believe this." I'm like, and I'm a super anxious person, and I'm running our banding station, and I'm like, I'm not gonna believe what? And he doesn't say anything else. And I know he's checking the nets. I'm like, are you okay? Hey, and I'm working, I'm banding birds. I give it 2 minutes for him to make it back to the bird banding station, and when he gets back, he is holding the motmot, and I think that every bird is really valuable, and it's kind of silly to think that one bird is more special than another bird. But at the same time, sometimes your favorite dessert is a Chips Ahoy cookie, and sometimes your favorite dessert is a creme brulee from a 5-star restaurant. You know what I mean? It was so cool. It was such a beautiful bird. Looking at it up close, they've got these serrated bills to help them cut through fruits. And so that was so interesting to see up close. And it was also a really exciting moment to me, having spent the whole field season training Josue in how to handle birds and how to band birds, to be able to like I didn't band the bird. I had Josue band the bird. He was the one who pulled it out. That was what we established as the rules, and it was really happy to get to do. Especially because I've also learned in bird banding. I've learned so much of it from you and so much of it from Maureen. And with all of the work that we did together and that y'all still do in Central Arkansas with teaching bird banding and making it available, it was a really new feeling to me to be more excited to watch my student band the bird than to want to band the bird. And that was also really special. I imagine that's something that you feel all the time. But for me, it was the first time I broke through that selfishness barrier. And I was like, oh.
That is really heartwarming to hear, Leah, and I know that feeling very well. And it is so wonderful to feel that getting passed through different generations.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a great story, and I love the dessert analogy. So
Yeah. And don't get me wrong, I love me a bag of Chips Ahoy cookies.
but the creme brulee, yeah.
Every once in a while as a
Yeah.
treat.
Awesome. Any other questions for Leah? All right, I'm gonna say no more questions. Leah, thank you so much for presenting. It was really great to have you and such awesome work. And like I said, we will be having you back once it's all done to hear all of it put together. So good luck as you continue with your work, and we're excited for you.